The hospital learned how to work with noise. Sirens had become part of the air, like ventilation. Shouts from the street filtered through the concrete and glass, dull and distant, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Inside, fluorescent lights stayed steady. Schedules held. Patients were prepped, cut, sutured, closed. Order persisted because it had to. She moved through it without friction. Her badge said intern nurse. The plastic was slightly cracked at the corner. No one commented on it. No one commented on her at all. She washed her hands longer than required. Not obsessively, precisely. Fingertips. Thumbs. Wrists. She counted without moving her lips. When she turned off the tap, she used her elbow, then waited half a second before reaching for the towel. Habit, not fear. In operating room 3, a cardiac procedure was already underway. The lead surgeon spoke quietly, controlled, as if raising his voice might unsteady his hands. A senior nurse adjusted the anesthesia drip. Another checked the monitor. The intern nurse stood at the instrument table. She did not fidget. She did not lean. Her posture was neutral, almost forgettable. When the surgeon asked for a clamp, she placed it into his hand before he finished the word. No flourish. No eye contact. Just timing. Thank you, he said automatically, already focused elsewhere. She nodded once. Not acknowledgement. Confirmation. Outside the OR, a security radio crackled. Someone mentioned the south entrance. Someone else mentioned glass. The words were swallowed by distance and protocol. Inside the room, nothing changed. The intern nurse noticed anyway. She noticed the way the anesthesiologist paused for half a beat longer than usual before adjusting the dosage. The way the circulating nurse glanced at the door twice in under a minute. The way the heart monitor ticked steadily despite the tension that had begun to leak into the room. She also noticed the absence of something. Security should have rotated past the operating wing 5 minutes ago. They hadn't. During a lull in the procedure, she stepped back, as if to restock supplies. No one tracked her movement. Interns were expected to float. To stay out of the way. She checked the crash cart seals. Intact. She checked the oxygen backup. Full. She adjusted the angle of a gurney parked too close to the wall, creating a clearer path through the corridor. It looked like tidying. It was preparation. A resident brushed past her, breathless. ER's backed up, he muttered to no one. They're bringing in protest injuries now. She met his eyes for the first time. How many? She asked. He hesitated, surprised she had spoken. I don't know. A lot. She nodded once. That was enough. Back in the OR, the surgeon's voice tightened slightly. The procedure was entering a delicate phase. There was no margin here. No room for distraction. The intern nurse took her position again. She felt the building, not metaphorically, but physically. The low vibration through the soles of her shoes. The way the air pressure shifted when distant doors opened and closed too quickly. The hospital was no longer sealed. It was porous now. Her breathing stayed slow. No one noticed when she adjusted the placement of a stool, aligning it with the door rather than the table. No one questioned why she memorized the location of every sharp object within reach. No one wondered why her gaze kept returning, calmly, to the exit. To everyone else, she was exactly what she appeared to be. An intern. Temporary. Replaceable. Someone learning. Outside, a crash echoed faintly, metal on glass. A shout followed. Then another. The sound reached the operating wing distorted, stripped of detail, but not of intent. The senior nurse stiffened. What was that? Probably nothing, the surgeon said, though he did not sound convinced. The intern nurse said nothing at all. She adjusted her gloves. Checked the time. Calculated distances she hoped she would not need. If nothing happened, she would finish her shift. File notes. Go home. If something did. She did not complete the thought. The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm. For now, the hospital still believed it was in control. The noise grew closer without getting louder. That was the part most people misunderstood. Real disorder did not announce itself. It seeped. It pressed against walls and waited for seams. In the emergency department, stretchers lined the corridor in careful defiance of fire code. Blood had been cleaned quickly, but the smell lingered, iron and disinfectant layered together. Protest injuries arrived in clusters, fractured wrists, lacerated scalps, a concussion that would not stop vomiting. The intern nurse moved where she was sent and where she was not. She replaced 4 bags before alarms sounded. She redirected a panicking family member with a single sentence and a steady look. She stood close to a resident whose hands shook as he sutured, close enough to stabilize without touching. A television mounted in the waiting area showed blurred footage of masked figures and police lines. The sound was off. No one asked to turn it on. A security supervisor passed through, speaking too quickly into his radio. "We're short too. South entrance is compromised. We're locking internal doors as needed." As needed, someone echoed under their breath. The intern nurse heard it all. She did not react. She checked the internal stairwells during a supply run, counting doors and noting which locks clicked fully into place and which hesitated. One door on level 2 stuck for a fraction of a second before closing. She pressed it twice more, slower this time, until it sealed cleanly. A charge nurse watched her. "You don't need to worry about that," she said, not unkindly. "Facilities will handle it." "Yes," the intern nurse replied. She did not explain why she checked anyway. Back near the operating wing, the atmosphere was thinner, quieter, but not calmer. A junior doctor whispered about a rumor: someone had tried to force their way in through the ambulance bay. Someone else said it was contained. No one knew by whom. The intern nurse paused at the scrub sink, letting water run over her hands as if she had all the time in the world. She watched the reflection in the steel backsplash. Her face was unreadable, not because she hid emotion, but because there was none to hide. When she finished, she dried her hands and stayed where she was. A gurney rolled past too fast, nearly clipping the corner. She reached out and stopped it with 2 fingers, redirecting it without effort. The orderly muttered an apology and kept moving. She watched him go, then glanced down the corridor. The operating rooms formed a straight line here. Controlled access. Controlled traffic. A good place to lose control if someone wanted to. Her radio, borrowed, not issued, crackled softly at her hip. She had taken it earlier without comment when a unit went missing. No one had asked for it back. "Security to ER," a voice said. "We need assistance. Now." There was a pause after the word now. No confirmation. The intern nurse adjusted the radio volume lower. Inside or 3, the surgery continued. The patient's chest rose and fell with mechanical consistency. The surgeon's hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. "Any updates?" he asked no one in particular. "ER's busy," the senior nurse said. Security stretched. He nodded. "Let's stay focused." The intern nurse stepped closer to the door, repositioning herself so she could see both the room and the corridor without turning her head. It looked like attentiveness. It was vigilance. She thought about exits. About lines of sight. About how long it would take for someone to run from the ambulance bay to this hallway if no one stopped them. Too long, if stopped early. Too short, if not. A sudden shout echoed from deeper in the hospital. Not loud enough to trigger alarms. Loud enough to carry intent. The intern nurse felt the shift ripple through the staff before anyone spoke. Shoulders tightened. Voices lowered. She leaned toward the circulating nurse. "If you need extra suction," she said quietly, "the backup is already primed." The nurse blinked. "I didn't ask." "I know," the intern nurse said. There was no urgency in her tone. That was what made it land. Minutes passed. Then another shout. Closer this time. A security officer ran past the operating wing, breathing hard. He did not slow. Did not look in. The intern nurse watched the corner where the corridor bent toward the elevators. She did not move to block it. Not yet. This was still the early phase. Noise outside. Order inside. But order, she knew, was a decision, not a condition. And decisions were about to be tested. They brought him in on a stretcher meant for compliance. He was anything but. The gurney burst through the ER doors with uneven speed, one wheel rattling, the orderly fighting to keep it straight. Two nurses followed, breathless, hands already red. The patient thrashed against the restraints, shoulders lifting despite the straps, legs kicking hard enough to rock the frame. Male, mid-20s, someone said too quickly. Blunt force trauma. Possible rib fracture. Laceration to the left forearm. The intern nurse stood back, observing. The mask was still on. Black cloth, tight around the eyes and mouth, darkened with sweat. It did not belong in a trauma bay. Not like this. Not anymore. "Get that off him," a resident snapped. "Wait," the intern nurse said. The word was quiet. It cut through anyway. The resident turned, irritated. "We need airway access." "Yes," she said. "But he's breathing fine." As if on cue, the man laughed, short, sharp, deliberate. Not the sound of someone in pain. Not the sound of someone confused. The intern nurse stepped closer. His vitals were stable. Too stable. Heart rate elevated, but not erratic. Blood pressure high, but controlled. His pupils tracked movement in the room even when his head did not. He was watching. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" the resident asked. The man did not answer. His eyes shifted to the door, then back to the ceiling. The intern nurse noticed his left hand. The laceration was shallow. Defensive, not accidental. The blood loss was minimal, yet he held his arm stiffly, exaggerating the injury. His right hand, uninjured, kept flexing against the restraint, testing tension, counting give. She leaned in slightly, just enough for him to register her presence. "Stay still," she said. Not a request. Not a threat. A statement. His eyes flicked to hers. Something changed. Not fear. Calculation. He stopped moving. For 3 seconds, the room exhaled. Then he started again, harder this time. "Sedate him," the resident said. "We're not doing this." The intern nurse shook her head once. "Not yet." The resident stared at her. "Who are you two?" 2 milligrams will make him worse," she said calmly. "He's not panicking. He's performing." The word hung in the air. The senior nurse hesitated, syringe in hand. "How do you know?" The intern nurse did not answer. She watched the man's breathing. Slow when no one touched him. Rapid the moment hands approached. She watched the way his gaze shifted toward the hallway every time the doors opened. He was waiting for something. Or someone. A security officer appeared at the bay entrance, already tired. "We need to move him," he said. "ER's not safe right now." "Where?" the resident asked. Anywhere with doors, the officer replied. The intern nurse felt the timing lock into place. Too early. Too rushed. He can't go to imaging yet, she said. He'll fight harder in transit. The officer frowned. You want him here? No, she said. I want him contained. The man laughed again, louder this time. You hear that? He said through the mask. His voice was clear. Steady. They don't know what to do with me. The intern nurse met his gaze. You're not as injured as you want them to think, she said. The laughter stopped. Around them, the ER hummed on, pain, urgency, controlled chaos. But in that small circle around the stretcher, the air thickened. You don't want imaging, she continued. You don't want sedation. You want movement. The man said nothing. She straightened. If we move you, she said, it will be on our terms. The security officer shifted his weight. We don't have time for this. We do, the intern nurse said. Or we lose it. The man pulled once more against the restraints, then relaxed completely. A performance ending. Fine, he said. Move me. The intern nurse nodded. Operating wing, she said. The resident's head snapped up. Absolutely not. He's not going into an OR, the officer said. He's not, the intern nurse replied. He's going near it. She turned the stretcher herself, guiding the front wheels with practiced ease. No one stopped her. Authority filled the gap where explanation should have been. As they rolled toward the elevators, the man's eyes stayed on her. He had wanted closer access. He just did not realize how closely he was being watched. The elevator ride was too quiet. No alarms. No shouting. Just the low hum of machinery and the soft rattle of the stretcher wheels as they crossed the threshold. The intern nurse stood at the head, one hand resting lightly on the rail, the other near the controls. The security officer positioned himself near the man's feet, baton visible but untouched. The masked man lay still. Too still. His breathing had evened out, controlled in a way pain rarely allowed. His eyes were closed now, but not slack. Deliberate. Conserving. The doors opened onto the operating level. The corridor lights were brighter here, harsher. The air colder. Everything smelled of antiseptic and rules. This was a place designed to keep chaos out, not to manage it once it arrived. The intern nurse guided the stretcher forward. Or access is restricted, a circulating nurse said, stepping into the hallway. What's going on? Temporary hold, the intern nurse replied. We'll clear the corridor in 30 seconds. The circulating nurse looked past her, confused. Who authorized? A crash echoed from below. Not close, but closer than before. A door somewhere gave way. Voices rose, sharp and overlapping. The security officer cursed under his breath. We need to move. The masked man chose that moment. He twisted his hips hard, using momentum rather than strength. One restraint snapped loose at the buckle, cheap plastic under sudden torque. His right hand came free. The intern nurse stepped back half a pace. Not retreat. Angle. Hold him, the officer shouted. Too late. The man surged upright, ripping the mask halfway off his face. His expression was focused, almost calm. He swung his free arm, striking the officer's wrist with the edge of his hand. The baton clattered to the floor. Panic rippled outward. A nurse screamed. Someone dropped a tray. Footsteps pounded as staff scattered toward side rooms and locked doors. The masked man slid off the stretcher and ran. Not toward the elevators. Toward the operating wing. The intern nurse moved. She did not chase him head-on. She cut across the corridor, reaching the access panel before he reached the turn. Her hand closed over the manual override, palm flat, fingers steady. She pulled once. The fire doors slammed down with a heavy metallic finality, sealing 2 ORs behind reinforced glass. The man skidded to a stop, surprised. He turned, scanning for another route. The intern nurse stood between him and the remaining open corridor. Alone. No baton. No raised voice. "Step back," the security officer shouted from behind her. She did not. The man laughed, breathless now, adrenaline finally breaking through control. "You think you can stop me?" She looked past him, not at him. At the door 2 or 3. At the red indicator light glowing steadily above it. "There is a patient open behind that door," she said. "You are not going in." He took a step toward her. She shifted her weight. Subtle. Her feet aligned with the tile seams, giving her traction. Her hands stayed low, open. "I don't want you," he said. "I want what's inside." "I know," she replied. Another shout echoed from the stairwell. More footsteps. The hospital was reacting now, too slowly, too loudly. The man lunged. She moved at the same time. Not forward. Not back. To the side. She caught his wrist with both hands, redirecting rather than stopping the force. His momentum carried him past her centerline. She stepped in close, shoulder tight to his chest, and hooked her foot behind his ankle. He went down hard. The sound was dull, final. Air rushed out of him in a single involuntary gasp. She was on him immediately, knee planted near his shoulder, not crushing, just enough to pin. Her grip shifted, controlling his arm at the elbow, applying pressure precisely where leverage mattered most. He struggled. Briefly. "Stop," she said. It was the same tone she had used in the ER. Calm. Certain. He stopped. Around them, the corridor had gone still. Staff watched from doorways. The security officer approached cautiously, eyes wide. "Who?" he began. She looked up at him. "Restraints," she said. "Proper ones. Now." He obeyed. As they secured the man, alarms finally began to sound, delayed, imperfect. Somewhere below, law enforcement would be organizing, planning, arriving. Here, it was already over. The intern nurse rose smoothly, adjusting her scrubs where they had twisted. She glanced once more at the door. The red light was still steady. The surgery uninterrupted. She exhaled for the first time in minutes. No one clapped. No one spoke. They only watched her, trying to reconcile what they had just seen with who they thought she was. They took the masked man away without ceremony. 2 additional security officers arrived late, faces tight with the embarrassment of being behind events. The restraints were upgraded, double-checked, applied by hands that shook slightly. No one argued with the intern nurse when she directed where he was placed, how he was turned, which corridor stayed closed. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The operating wing remained sealed. Fire doors stayed down. The hospital's emergency protocol had finally caught up with reality, but it moved clumsily, like a heavy machine waking from sleep. The intern nurse stood near the wall, out of the way again. That was deliberate. A supervisor arrived, clipboard already open. "I need names," she said. "What happened here?" The security officer looked at the intern nurse, then away. He breached from ER. Tried to reach the OR. She stopped him. The supervisor followed his gaze. "She?" The intern nurse met her eyes briefly. No challenge there. Just readiness. "What's your name?" the supervisor asked. She answered it. Quietly. "And your role?" Intern nurse. A pause. The supervisor wrote it down, slower than necessary. You have training? Yes. What kind? The intern nurse did not answer immediately. She looked past the supervisor, down the corridor where staff were returning to position, where a circulating nurse was wiping blood from the floor with methodical strokes. Enough, she said. The supervisor closed the clipboard. We'll talk later. They never would. Inside or three, the surgeon finished the final sutures with the same care he had begun with. When he stepped back, he noticed the slight tremor in his hands only after the fact. Time? He asked. Within margin, the anesthesiologist replied. The intern nurse entered to assist with cleanup. She moved quietly, efficiently. No one told her where to stand. No one told her what to do. At one point, the surgeon looked up at her. Really looked. You anticipated that clamp earlier, he said. Before I asked. Yes, she replied. He waited for more. There was none. Outside the OR, law enforcement finally arrived. Their boots sounded different on the floor, heavier, more certain. They spoke in short phrases, scanning, assessing. One of them stopped when he saw her. Not stared. Not questioned. Not challenged. Recognized. It was subtle. A straightening of posture. A shift in tone when he spoke to the others. He did not address her directly. He did not need to. Situation stable, he said to his team. Perimeter held. Held by whom was left unsaid. The intern nurse finished her task and stepped back. She washed her hands again, just as precisely as before. Blood came off. Adrenaline did not. A nurse approached her near the sinks. Younger. Voice low. How did you know what to do? The intern nurse considered the question. Not because it was difficult, but because the answer was. I paid attention, she said. It was true. It was also incomplete. The nurse nodded, unsatisfied but unwilling to push. Over the next hour, the hospital settled into a strained version of normal. Doors reopened selectively. Patients were rerouted. Reports were written with careful language. The intern nurse did not appear in most of them. She sat briefly in the break room, hands wrapped around a paper cup of water she did not drink. Her knuckles ached where she had redirected force. She rotated her wrist once, testing range of motion. It would bruise. That was the cost. No medals. No acknowledgement. Just a dull ache in a room full of people who now watched her differently. She stood, discarded the cup, and returned to the floor. There was still a shift to finish. The hospital did not calm all at once. It relaxed in stages, like a body coming out of shock, systems restarting unevenly, some too fast, some too slow. Radios still chirped. Doors still locked and unlocked without explanation. Staff moved with the stiffness that followed fear, careful not to name it. The intern nurse felt the delay more than most. Her body had already finished what it needed to do. Now it waited. She was restocking a supply cabinet when the call came from OR3. Pressure drop, the anesthesiologist said, voice tight but controlled. We need blood. Now. The intern nurse was already moving. She took the cooler herself, ignoring the protest from a tech who tried to help. Her wrist flared with pain as she lifted it. She adjusted her grip, compensating without slowing. Inside the OR, the patient's vitals wavered on the edge of acceptable. The surgeon's shoulders were rigid, focus narrowed to a point only he could see. Clamp, he said. She placed it in his hand. The rhythm returned. Slowly. Deliberately. Outside, raised voices echoed again, not from protesters this time, but from law enforcement coordinating a delayed sweep of the building. Their presence was heavier now, more visible. With it came questions. A hospital administrator stopped the intern nurse in the corridor. "We're going to need a statement," he said. "Security incident. You were involved." "Yes," she replied. "Were you injured?" She shook her head. "No." It was not entirely true. It was sufficient. He hesitated. "You showed unusual composure." She waited. "If you have prior experience," he continued, "we need it documented. For liability." "There was no excess force," she said. "That's not." "There was restraint," she corrected gently. "By everyone." The administrator studied her, searching for something he could label. He did not find it. "We'll follow up," he said. She nodded and walked past him. In the stairwell, she paused for the first time since the breach. The door closed softly behind her, muting the noise. She leaned one shoulder against the wall and allowed herself a single, controlled breath. Her hand shook when she unclenched it. The memory came uninvited, weight shifting, joint alignment, the exact point where pressure became injury. She had stopped short of it. Chosen to. That choice had consequences. If she had finished the motion, the man would not have struggled. Would not have required extra restraints. The threat would have ended faster. But the patient had been 10 meters away. Open. Vulnerable. She flexed her wrist again. Pain answered. A fair trade. She returned to the floor. Later, she passed the room where the masked man was held under guard. He was awake now, mask gone, face pale with anger and something else, uncertainty. He watched her as she passed. "You could have broken it," he said quietly. "My arm." She stopped. "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you?" She considered him, really looked at him this time. Not as a threat. As a fact. "Because I didn't need to." She continued on. By the end of the shift, exhaustion settled into her bones. Not dramatic. Just deep. The kind that did not show on the face. She changed out of her scrubs in silence. The bruise on her wrist had darkened, blooming where leverage had met restraint. She wrapped it carefully, the way she had been taught long before hospitals. When she stepped back onto the floor, the hospital was still standing. Still functional. Still pretending this had been just another difficult day. She accepted the pretense. It was part of the cost. Authority did not announce itself. It settled. By the time the tactical team completed their sweep, the hospital had already adapted around the absence of chaos. Hallways reopened. Patients were reassigned. The operating schedule adjusted without comment. What remained was a thin layer of tension, invisible but shared. The intern nurse felt it shift when she entered the command corridor near administration. 2 law enforcement supervisors stood with hospital leadership, voices low, words clipped. Their uniforms were clean. Their boots were not. They had arrived late enough to miss the worst of it, and early enough to feel the discomfort of that fact. One of them looked up as she passed. His eyes paused on her wrist. Then on her posture. He turned slightly toward his partner. "She here when it happened?" he asked. The question was not casual. "Yes," the security officer replied. She intervened. The supervisor nodded once. No surprise. No follow-up. He stepped aside to let her pass, an unconscious gesture of deference that went unnoticed by everyone except the intern nurse. She did not acknowledge it. She did not slow. Inside the OR support area, a circulating nurse approached her with a clipboard. "They want timelines," she said. "Who did what? When?" The intern nurse took the clipboard. "Read it." Returned it. "This part is incorrect," she said, pointing to a line that placed security in the corridor before the breach. They arrived after. The nurse frowned. That's what security said. It's still incorrect, the intern nurse replied. The nurse hesitated, then crossed it out. Rewrote it. No argument. Elsewhere, a junior officer began asking staff direct questions. He reached the intern nurse last. Ma'am, can you tell me? The supervisor cut in quietly. She's clear. The officer looked confused. But I need. We have enough, the supervisor said. The intern nurse met his gaze for a brief moment. There was no familiarity there. Just mutual understanding. She returned to work. In or3, the patient was being transferred to recovery. The surgeon removed his gloves and sat heavily on a stool. That could have gone very differently, he said to no one in particular. Yes, the intern nurse replied. He looked at her again. You didn't hesitate. No, she said. Why? She did not answer right away. She checked the monitor, confirmed stability, then spoke. Because hesitation would have been a choice, she said. And the wrong one. He absorbed that. Did not challenge it. A senior administrator entered the room later, accompanied by a uniformed official with no visible insignia. The official's presence changed the air subtly. Conversations softened. Movements became more precise. The intern nurse finished her task and stepped back, ready to leave. The official stopped her with a glance. You handled yourself well, he said. It was not praise. It was acknowledgement. Thank you, she replied. What's your background? She met his eyes. Measured him the way she had measured the masked man. Then she looked away. Medical, she said. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Of course. That was the end of it. No names were exchanged. No credentials shown. No reports amended to reflect the truth more fully. Later, as the shift finally wound down, a nurse whispered to another, she wasn't even supposed to be here today. The intern nurse heard it. She did not correct it. She signed out. Returned her borrowed radio without comment. The battery was nearly dead. As she walked toward the exit, she passed a line of officers heading in, late to a crisis already resolved. One of them paused, stepping aside to clear her path. She walked through without breaking stride. Authority, she knew, was not about being seen. It was about being recognized, by the right people, for the right reasons, and only when necessary. The masked man made one last attempt to regain control. It was quiet. Predictable. Almost routine. They had moved him to a secured treatment room near the operating wing, close enough for medical oversight, far enough to keep him from foot traffic. 2 officers stood outside. Another leaned against the wall, posture relaxed in a way that suggested confidence rather than comfort. The intern nurse was called in because the man complained of numbness in his arm. She knew what it was before she entered. She stood just inside the doorway, letting the room settle around her. The man lay on the bed, restraints intact, eyes sharp. He smiled when he saw her. Thought you'd come, he said. Yes, she replied. She checked his vitals without rushing. Capillary refill. Pulse. Range of motion. Her touch was clinical, impersonal. He watched her hands closely, cataloging movements the way she had cataloged his. You embarrassed them, he said. Out there. That wasn't my concern. You could have made it easier, he pressed. For everyone. She paused, fingers resting lightly on his wrist. She felt the tension coiled beneath his skin, the readiness that had not fully drained. I made it smaller, she said. That was enough. His smile faded. You think this is over? She met his eyes fully now. Calm. Unmoving. For you, she said, it stopped the moment you crossed that door. He tested the restraint again, slowly this time. There was no give. Outside, raised voices echoed briefly, administration, jurisdiction, paperwork. None of it entered the room. The intern nurse adjusted the restraint near his shoulder, tightening it just enough to remove leverage. Her movements were economical, precise. He flinched, not from pain, but from the realization that she understood exactly how much pressure to apply. You didn't have to touch me like that, he said. Yes, she replied. I did. She finished her assessment and stepped back. There's no nerve damage, she said to the officer at the door. Just inflammation. He'll feel it tomorrow. The officer nodded. You want us to keep him here, she said. No transport until law enforcement formally takes custody. He's calmer when there's no movement. The officer followed the instruction without question. The intern nurse turned to leave. Hey, the man said, urgency breaking through his control. What are you, really? She stopped at the threshold. For a moment, it seemed she might answer. Instead, she said, someone who didn't let you get what you wanted. She left the room. By the time she returned to the operating wing, the final report was being signed. The surgeon initialed the last page, then removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. We're done, he said quietly. The patient was stable. The OR lights dimmed. Equipment powered down in sequence, the way it always did after something irreversible had been survived. The intern nurse helped clean. Disposed of sharps. Reset trays. Ordinary actions, done carefully. Outside, the riot had dissipated. Not resolved, just moved elsewhere. Sirens receded. The hospital remained intact. She changed back into her street clothes and checked her wrist one last time. The bruise had spread, dark and defined. She covered it with her sleeve. No one stopped her as she left. No one asked for her name again. At the exit, a senior officer stood speaking quietly into a phone. He looked up as she approached, paused, then stepped aside to open the door for her. Take care, he said. She nodded once and stepped into the night. Behind her, the hospital doors closed softly. The crisis was contained. The threat neutralized. The world moved on, unaware of how close it had come to something worse. That was how it was supposed to be. Morning came without ceremony. The hospital did not mark the transition. There were no announcements, no pauses for reflection. Day shift arrived with fresh coffee and incomplete information. Night shift left quietly, carrying the weight of what could not be handed off. The intern nurse returned once more before leaving the building. She walked the operating wing one last time, not to check on people, but on spaces. Doors aligned. Locks engaged. Equipment where it belonged. The corridor looked ordinary again. That mattered. In OR 3, the bed was empty. Clean sheets. No blood. No evidence of urgency beyond the faint smell of disinfectant layered too thickly. A nurse was restocking supplies, moving slowly. He made it, she said without looking up. Yes, the intern nurse replied. The nurse hesitated. You should know, the surgeon asked about you. The intern nurse paused. What did he ask? What your plans were, the nurse said. Whether you'd be staying on. The intern nurse considered the question. It was not the first time it had been asked in different forms. I'm scheduled through the end of the week, she said. The nurse nodded. Of course. In the administrative offices, reports were finalized. Language was careful. Passive. Events had occurred. Protocols had been followed. A security breach had been contained. Names appeared where required. They did not appear where they complicated things. Her name was one of those. A supervisor signed off without comment. At the secured room, the masked man was gone. Transferred before dawn. The bed stripped, restraints removed. The space returned to function. No one mentioned how quietly he had left. In the locker room, the intern nurse changed out of her clothes. She unwrapped her wrist, inspected the bruise, then rewrapped it more loosely. It would fade. So would this. She placed her badge in her bag instead of clipping it on. The cracked corner caught briefly on the fabric, then released. Outside, the street was almost calm. Debris had been pushed to the edges. Police presence was lighter now, more symbolic than tactical. The city exhaled, unaware of the narrow margin it had passed through. The intern nurse stood for a moment, feeling the cool air on her face. A text vibrated in her pocket. Shift covered. See you next week. She typed a brief reply. Put the phone away. She walked toward the transit stop, blending into the morning crowd, students, workers, people already moving past the night as if it belonged to another world. Behind her, the hospital continued its work. No plaque would mark what had happened. No training module would mention her decisions. The story would flatten with time, edges smoothed by repetition and paperwork. She accepted that. Quiet endings were the only ones that lasted. She boarded the bus. Took a seat near the window. Rested her hands in her lap, steady now. When the hospital disappeared from view, she did not look back. There was nothing left to protect. Nothing left to prove. Only the work, waiting again.